I am Vincent, and with my brother Olivier, we spent many years dreaming about and planning for our attempt at the Northwest Passage. This is a story of our summer 2019 transit of the Northwest Passage from Rhode Island to the Aleutian Islands via Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Greenland, the Canadian Arctic Archipelago, and Alaska. The Northwest Passage itself is typically only passable for a few weeks of summer. Jean, a childhood friend, joined us for this voyage. Alioth is a 53-foot aluminum French-built sailboat designed and equipped specifically for high-altitude navigation. We spent the preceding winter refitting and servicing the boat, inspecting the mast and rigging, and installing a few additional systems to facilitate our Arctic navigation. We also upgraded our supply of spare parts and tools. We provisioned the boat for 3 months. 2 months for the expected transit time, and an additional month in case of adverse ice conditions. The first leg of our journey was from Newport, Rhode Island to Halifax, Nova Scotia, via Portland, Maine. My daughter Acadia and her boyfriend Roger joined us for the initial sail. Acadia and Roger left us in Portland, and Olivier and I continued on our own to Halifax. Very light conditions with some sizable residual swells. We're still early in the season and very few sailboats around. We left the boat for the following couple of months at the Armadale Yacht Club on a mooring in Halifax, a very low-key, welcoming yacht club. The next leg of our trip took us from Halifax to Pierre and Miquelon. We left early July and were joined by my brother's wife, Beatrice, his daughter Carolyn, and a good friend Gillian. We took the opportunity to visit the Bredor Lake. The Bredor Lake is accessible from the southwest via a loch and the short St. Peter's Canal. The Bredor Lake is actually a very deep bay connected on its northern side with the Atlantic Ocean. We took advantage of the pleasant conditions to tick off a few items off the work list. The overnight stay in the very welcoming town of Quebec was very pleasant. After a 24-hour sail under ideal conditions, we reached the French territory of Saint Pierre and Miquelon. Traditionally, Saint Pierre was a vibrant center for cod fishing on the Grand Banks. Unfortunately, due to overfishing, no substantial fishing activity remains nowadays. We switched crew in Saint Pierre. Beatrice, Caroline and Gillian left us, and Jean flew in from Belgium. Our next leg took us from Saint Pierre to Bond Bay in Newfoundland. This was the official departure of our attempt at the Northwest Passage. We first stopped for a few hours in Fortune, Newfoundland, for Jean's lost luggage to be delivered. Unpleasant headwind conditions along the spectacular south coast of Newfoundland caused us to make an impromptu stop in Rose Blanche, the town becoming slowly deserted. The south coast of Newfoundland lacks road infrastructure. Due to the high cost of servicing the small local communities via the ocean, the Canadian government is offering financial incentives for people to relocate. We then stopped at the Gromont National Park in Bond Bay, which gave us the opportunity to reconnect briefly with Caroline and Gillian, who had been hiking and camping in the area. This stop gave us the opportunity to change the oil and service the engine. The next leg took us from Gromont to Nuuk in Greenland via the Strait of Belle Isle, Iceberg Alley and the Labrador Sea. It's in the Strait of Belle Isle between Labrador and Newfoundland that we got to see our first icebergs. These icebergs carved from glaciers in Greenland and were brought to Newfoundland by a counterclockwise current running through the Labrador Sea and Baffin Bay. For the first 24 hours after leaving land, we crossed what's known as Iceberg Alley, and we are to maintain a vigilant lookout for floating ice. A couple of days into the crossing towards Greenland, we encountered some flat calm conditions, which gave us the opportunity to finish our ice pole and to attempt one more time to fix a stubborn leak on our freshwater maker. The 5-day sail across the Labrador Sea gave us the opportunity to settle into the routine of life at sea, with standing watches, cooking, resting, reading, and maintaining the boat. Prior to reaching land, we started again seeing icebergs. This time, they were drifting north, carried by the current along the west coast of Greenland. We spent 3 days in the capital of Greenland, connecting with other crews also on their way to attempt the Northwest Passage. The exchange of ideas and experiences started developing bonds that only grew stronger as we sailed through the passage. We also spent some time exploring the city of 18,000, which appears to be rapidly shifting from a traditional lifestyle to a very modern one, while skipping quite a few steps. Considering the fact that there are no roads connecting any other towns in Greenland, the amount of traffic that we saw in Nuuk was surprising. Although we did not go as far as purchasing whale meat. A surprising abundant availability of fresh fruit, vegetables, and other quality produce enabled us to resupply our galley. Our next leg took us along the west coast of Greenland, from Nuuk to the famous Disko Bay. Even with Alioth's exceptional 3,000-mile motoring range, we took advantage of the heavily subsidized fuel prices to top up our tanks in anticipation of light air conditions in the Arctic. Unpleasant headwind conditions made us decide to take a detour around an island at the entrance of the spectacular Kangerlussuaq Fjord. While continuing our sail north along the scenic west coast of Greenland, we crossed the Arctic Circle. As we had previously experienced in Norway and in Iceland, we were not benefiting from 24 hours of daylight. Our next stop was in the picturesque town of Sisimiut. We rafted up against 3 other boats heading for the Northwest Passage, each of them suffering from mechanical problems. Little did we know that our turn would come. In Sisimiut, we saw our first sled dogs. We had been warned not to approach them. They are undomesticated working animals chained at a safe distance from each other. We pulled out our drone to record our arrival amongst the icebergs of Disko Bay. Unfortunately, due to my poor piloting, this was the only footage we were able to record with that drone before it hit the lifelines and sunk. Disko Bay is the largest bay on the west coast of Greenland. It is famous for its concentration of icebergs, one of which is likely to have sunk the Titanic. No better way to celebrate this grandiose scenery than Scotch with 10,000-year-old ice. Our next stop was on Disko Island.
When the cold seeps in your soul, how we huddle round that little pot stove, burning oily rags and coal.
In the small village of Nuuk, the peaceful spectacle of very slowly drifting floating ice was mesmerizing. With such great weather conditions, it was time to get our dinghy ready for future explorations. Next, while traveling east in Disko Bay, we encountered some dense fog conditions. A very common occurrence while sailing amongst icebergs. We were very pleasantly surprised to find out how good the radar was at detecting floating ice, including the low-lying growlers. We then stopped in Ilulissat, a fishing harbour, which that day was also visited by tourists from a small cruise ship. Ilulissat is known for a UNESCO World Heritage Site, its ice fjord, a vast expanse of dense floating ice downstream of the Kujalleq Glacier. This is one of the fastest and most active glaciers in the world. It carves 10% of the ice produced by all glaciers in Greenland. Seal hunting is as popular as fishing, and it is common to see guns being loaded on small boats. No one appeared surprised when a large growler drifted into the harbour. In the middle of the Arctic night, whales were feeding at the mouth of the ice fjord. Regular engine oil changes and diesel fill-ups are part of the routine of sailing in the Arctic. We took advantage of ideal conditions in Disko Bay to launch a dinghy and capture images of the boat amongst icebergs. A few hours north, we enter Atta Sound with its impressive equipped glacier, and Alioth experiences first contact with floating glacier ice. Over the past 30 years, the Arctic has been warming at twice the rate as the rest of the globe. We experienced this firsthand. Unprecedented warm temperatures were causing the glaciers to shed record amount of ice. So much ice that we were prevented from getting close to the usually accessible glacier face. Instead, we stopped the engine and drifted to listen to the glacier cracking sounds, and to take in one of the most memorable sceneries of our trip. Facing wind from the north and dense ice, we decide to make our last stop in Greenland in Fortune Bay on Disko Island. Our next leg took us across Baffin Bay to the entrance of the Northwest Passage and the territory of Nunavut in Canada. During this treaty passage, the weather for the first 24 hours was overcast and windy. By then we were keeping in touch with other boats attempting the Northwest Passage via email. Months earlier, we also had started exchanging information with two benevolent, shore-based advisors who had been guiding boats through the Northwest Passage for years. Victor, with whom we had frequent exchanges, and Peter, occasional ones, provided us with invaluable support throughout our journey. As we approached Baffin Island, we started seeing icebergs again. This time they were slowly drifting south along the coast of Canada. Baffin Island is the largest island in Canada. It is more than twice as large as Great Britain. This is a familiar landscape in the eastern part of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. We had reached the entrance of the Northwest Passage, which stretches from the western end of Baffin Bay to the Bering Strait in Alaska. We enjoyed very pleasant sailing conditions as we entered the passage between Baffin Island and Billet Island to the north. Our first stop and entry port into the Canadian Arctic was Pond Inlet, a small Inuit village with a population of 1,600. This settlement, like many in the Arctic, unfortunately suffers from social issues and racial tension. Docks are rare in the Arctic, and Pond Inlet only offered a beach landing. Two other vessels were there to attempt the Northwest Passage. Tekla, a 100-year-old Dutch steel ketch, and Molly sailed solo by Randall, who I had met earlier in Halifax. He had left San Francisco 10 months earlier and sailed non-stop around Antarctica to Nova Scotia and was now attempting to make it back to San Francisco within a year. From Pond Inlet we proceeded clockwise around Billet Island towards Devon Island. We anchored for the night in Ragged Island and had our first hike ashore in polar bear territory. This provided the opportunity to check our equipment list for such outings. No bears in sight, only an Arctic hare whose fur turns white in winter. The following day while motoring, smoke and a burnt smell filled the cabin. After pulling out the fire extinguishers, we realized that our inline generator had fried itself beyond repair. We decided to pursue a trip and do without the generator. On our way north in Navy board, we stopped in the middle of the night to take in the view of the grandiose Iqaluit Glacier. A few hours later, we dropped anchor on Tay Bay where Molly was already anchored. We ended up being the last two boats attempting the Northwest Passage this season. Upon getting news from the boats ahead of us via satellite email that they were enduring gale force winds and encountering lots of dense drifting ice, we decided to take advantage of our sheltered anchorage and go for an extended hike. In 1994, Alva Simon overwintered solo in his ice-bound sailboat in Tay Bay. We were glad to be there during the summer. The murky water color is due to sediments in meltwater from the glacier at the head of the bay. The following morning, we lift anchor at the same time as Molly. Soon, while passing the Wollaston Islands, we encountered the super yacht Rose Hardy, returning from Devon Island where they faced some difficult conditions. This is also where, in the distance, we had the only polar bear sighting of our journey. We then had a very pleasant sail across Lancaster Sound in 25 knots easterly. These were the last icebergs of our trip. On Devon Island, the world's largest uninhabited island, we stopped on Dundas Harbour. We had reached the most northerly point of our trip, 74 degrees north. We went ashore to explore an abandoned Royal Canadian Mounted Police station. This post was established in 1924 to prevent poachers from Greenland to hunt in the Canadian Arctic. Facing harsh living conditions, the first two officers perished on site, one from a self-inflicted gunshot and the other in a hunting accident. Whaleways brought a storage container with survival equipment on shore. Polar bears are known to have chewed inflatable dinghies. Our next stop was Blaney Bay, with its large glacier descending to the sea from the Devon ice cap. Due to the warm conditions, the resident walrus colony had left the bay, another reminder of our changing climate. Having practiced the landing technique ashore with the new drone, we felt confident enough to pull it out for a few shots. Since the commonly sailed Prince Regent Inlet was still icebound, we headed across Lancaster towards the entrance of Peel Sound and the most challenging floating ice conditions of our trip. We had transitioned from freshwater glacier icebergs to saltwater pack ice. The Canadian Ice Service publishes ice condition charts daily. We were able to download them via a satellite communication system. These charts show ice concentration in 1/10 increments. In Peel Sound we encountered up to 6/10 ice concentration, which required constant vigil and frequent course changes. Drifting sea ice adds another dimension to navigation. Due to the currents, the ice is in constant motion. It is mesmerizing to watch. Due to light refraction, mirages are common in the Arctic, and distances can be difficult to guess. Upon exiting Moeyersoms, we encountered some patches of open water in Franklin Strait and were able to set sail for a while progressing south. Next, while motoring in Larsen Sound, our propulsion system started making a loud noise and shaking violently. This left us only able to motor while idling and therefore without any power. Soon afterwards, we encountered a zone with up to 8 ice concentration. After a couple of unsuccessful attempts at trying to find a way through this dense ice without full engine power, we ended up drifting for 30 hours while waiting for a lane to open up. The area where we drifted was itself rapidly filling up with ice. This was the moment in our trip where we felt the most vulnerable and at the mercy of the elements. Eventually, a lane appeared to open up, and we were able to confirm its viability by radio contact with the Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker Terry Fox, which was stationed south of this dense ice zone. We then waited for another 6 hours for 2 other boats to join us to escort us through this dense patch. We were grateful for the arrival of Randall on Molly and Pablo on the Argentinian Mandragora. This was Pablo's second attempt at the Northwest Passage. He was back with an identical boat to the one that had sunk the prior summer after being crushed by the ice at the entrance of Bellot Strait. The fog lifted, the sun came out, and it is under very pleasant conditions that we were able to convoy past our final ice. A few hours later, we exited the last of the dense ice of our trip. The mood brightened, and we tossed Randall one of Olivier's delicious fresh baked breads, which appeared to be well appreciated. A day later, while in Victoria Strait, the wind died and our propulsion system failed completely. We were 24 hours out of Cambridge Bay, and Randall generously offered us a tow. Due to a fast approaching, intense summer storm, a rare event at this time of the year in the Arctic, and another example of a consequence of a changing climate. Upon arrival in Cambridge Bay, we dropped anchor in a remote, secured cove and had a celebratory dinner with our escorts. Then With the help of some crew members from the super yacht Kamaxita, we proceeded to dismantle the propulsion system to attempt to diagnose the cause of the failure. We moved ashore to a hotel just before the 60-knot storm hit. We ended up spending 11 days in Cambridge Bay. During this time we were able to determine that the issue with our propulsion system was a failed coupler, which had started disintegrating 10 days earlier and caused our generator to fry. We were able to locate a partially compatible part in New Brunswick, Canada. Expedited shipping was going to take at least a month to get the part to us, by which time the Arctic Ocean would have started icing up again and prevented us from reaching Alaska. Luckily, we met some executives from a Quebec-based shipping company who were staying at a hotel. They had some colleagues flying in from Quebec a few days later via private charter to support the annual visit of one of their ships to supply Cambridge Bay with heavy equipment. We accepted their offer to bring the part to us. We celebrated the departure of our friends, and soon we were the last ones remaining in Cambridge Bay. The new coupler arrived and we were able to make it fit, with the help of the team at the only mechanical shop in town. After a brief, satisfactory check of the system, it was time for us to go. The closest boats were a week ahead of us. We were now racing against the start of the Arctic Ocean freezing season and of the fall storm season in Alaska. During this part of the trip and until Point Barrow, northwest corner of Alaska, the scenery was monotonous, consisting of low-lying coastlines dotted at regular intervals by automated radar stations, remnants of the Cold War era distant early warning or dew line. A few nights in a row we were treated to mesmerizing and fast moving aurora borealis. Due to the less than perfect repair on our propulsion system, we were now only able to motor at 6 knots instead of the usual 7.5, and we faced the consistent 1 knot current against us. All this made for slow progress. After leaving the Arctic archipelago, we entered the Beaufort Sea and transited through Canada's Northwest Territories and Yukon before reaching Alaska. With a mixture of exercising and cooking, the crew did its best to maintain its fitness and spirits during this long leg. Our long motoring range enabled us to sail this 2,000-mile leg without requiring a refueling stop, and we slowly started catching the boats ahead of us. We passed Point Barrow, the northernmost point of the United States, and headed south in the Chukchi Sea. The forecast was for a strong storm to pass south of us. We slowed the boat down overnight to let the worst of it pass below us. Nevertheless, the approach to the Bering Strait lived up to its fierce reputation. We crossed the Arctic Circle again during this storm. Conditions improved somewhat as we passed the Bering Strait, the official end of the Northwest Passage, and we were able to celebrate. "24 hours later, we arrived in Nome, Alaska, a town of 3,800, whose atmosphere consists of a mix of gold mining, Far West, and Mad Max. We had the traditional picture taken in front of the statue of Hamilton, the first to cross the Northwest Passage. Three other sailboats were already in Nome after completing the Northwest Passage. We had a joint celebration. The highlight of it was the arrival of Randall and Molly in the middle of the night. We capped the celebration with a fondue by our Swiss friends Amanda and Robin on Morgan. From Nome, it would take us about a week to sail to Sand Point in the Aleutian Islands. Unfortunately, due to the delay in Cambridge Bay, Olivier and Jean had to fly back to Belgium. Bob and Alan offered graciously to come from Massachusetts on short notice to replace them. As expected, the Bering Sea delivered one of its legendary storms. Around this time we started hearing some unsettling noise around our lifting keel. We found out later upon hauling the boat that one of the wedges holding it in place had sheared. Upon approaching the Aleutian Islands, the famed Dutch harbour fishing fleet appeared on the AIS. We sailed through the Aleutian Islands via Unimak Pass, within sight of a spectacular 2,000-meter glacier-capped volcano. We had to slow down a few times to free some long strands of kelp caught in our keel and rudders. As we approached our final destination, the sun came out and we got to enjoy some of the most pleasant sailing conditions of the trip. As we approached the Shumagen Islands, we came within sight of our first Alaskan fishing boat. The amazing Alaskan sea life was on display. We reached Sandpoint, a very active fishing harbor, and the end of our journey. Local fishermen offered us a warm welcome and supplied us with much appreciated fresh halibut and crabs. Alioth was hauled ashore and secured for the winter. The last time I had seen trees was in Newfoundland 2 months earlier. A short flight to Anchorage started the long trip home. In summary, we were lucky to make it, as 2018 had been a difficult year for ice, and 2020 was closed due to COVID. We expected intensity, and got it with strong feelings of exposure and vulnerability. For this trip, self-reliance is key, and a good engine a necessity. The support from the shore-based advisors and amongst boats was amazing. 2.5 months at sea is a long journey, and maintaining the safety, the health, and the spirits of the crew is key. The feeling of not having had sufficient time to properly visit the Arctic was common amongst all crew. Transiting the Northwest Passage is about patiently waiting for the ice to open, and then rushing to Alaska before the winter sets in. Navigating through the ice is mesmerizing, and we are ready to sign up for it again. We are very grateful to all that made this adventure possible for us.